I wasn't in the National Theatre, although Olivia had asked me a couple of times, and I don't know why it never happened really, but I was at the Royal Court and I was filming and I was doing a lot of things in those days. But anyway, Robert Stevens had played Vershinin in their first production and had been taken ill and couldn't do either the last leg of the tour and also the film. And he asked me to take over from Robert Stevens, so that's how I came to be in it. And I got that and Alan Bates because I wasn't really, strictly speaking, a member of the National Theatre. And so he devised that way of billing me. It looks a little bit odd, I know, but because nobody could possibly be expected to know that. But anyway, I did a week out in Brighton, and I did the rehearsals. I did a week in Brighton. And it was really just thinking about the film mostly, because the play had virtually been done, and it had been done on stage. So I came to it as a film. They were a company, they were an established company, and I had to join them. And it's always very difficult to take over from somebody. They were all totally certain of themselves on stage. I was the one who had to fit in. I was the one who had to sort of just work out exactly who was there and how to make sense of myself without having grown into it with them. But when it came to filming it, they were at as much of a disadvantage, if you can call it a disadvantage, as I was, because they were having to rethink, they were having to regroup and re-emphasize, re-gauge the levels of their performances and the intimacy of the camera to get used to that. So we were all doing the same thing. By the time we came to film it, I didn't feel divorced from them at all. We became a group very quickly. I mean, it was a wonderful company. And I think Olivier's 12 years at the National Theatre, I think it was 12, were almost the most exciting, the most consistently sort of triumphant years that anyone's ever had running a theatre. I mean, it never seemed, nothing ever. I went to almost everything, and everything was terrific. Nothing ever seemed to really be a disaster there. It was a golden age. So I was very glad to come in on the end of it, albeit in a film. That film probably was part of his last great era, his energies. He was recording the play. I think all plays should be filmed. I think we should forget about this division of cinema and theatre. I think any sort of great production should be filmed, just for the future, if for nothing else. And he did. I don't know whether he made a virtue of it. I mean, cinema buffs probably don't like that fact that it has a theatrical constraint on it. But Chekhov is notoriously difficult to do on film. And I don't know quite why that is. Nobody's really cracked that. I think Michael Kakianis did come very close to it with The Cherry Orchard, which I did with Charlotte Rampling 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. So I think for Olivier to do it in the way that it had been successful made a lot of sense. Vershinin is this figure who almost becomes a fantasy, a mirage for the three sisters, and particularly, of course, for Masha, who falls in love with him.
I was only 18 when I was married.
And he plays up to that, not maliciously, not... He's just someone who lives out an idea of himself, or someone else's idea of him. It's a strange... He's almost like drifting in through life and letting it all happen to him. And he plays the role that circumstances give him. And I think that's the difficulty of playing him, and also the sort of mystery of it, and the ambiguity of him. It's a very... You can't quite get him, you can't quite catch him, I think we were both in tune and in sympathy with what we were doing and with what we both brought to it. Of course, the three sisters are just waiting for the world to open. You know, they're waiting to the dream of something beyond their lives. And Masha, of course, thinks with him that she's found it. And she hasn't. It's a wonderful account of people's lives and of them trying to intermingle and trying to fulfill each other's and dreams and being disappointed, and the yearning for a much fuller experience of life. Shooting periods had got fairly short by that time. I think it was shot fairly quickly. It could have been 6 or 8 weeks, I suppose, which even that's long compared to some shoots today. I remember doing Far From the Madding Crowd, and we shot it for 6 months. Well, I mean, you can't. People don't do that now. You can't do that. Certainly not outside America. He was wonderfully alive and challenging, really. He came up to me, he was hugely encouraging, and he came up to me one day and said, I've just seen the rushes of something. He said, it was absolutely terrific. You've got to see it. And I went to see it, and I didn't think it was very good. And I didn't quite know how to tell him, you see. And I said to Joan, I said, that's not very good, Dad. I don't think I've done that very well at all. Why does he like it? And so she obviously told him, and he came up to me with this glazed expression and said, I hear you don't think it was very good, you know, looking at me in this sort of glassy eye. And I said, well, I didn't. I thought I really ought to have done that a bit better. Oh, walked away. You know, was obviously hugely disappointed that I hadn't liked it, or annoyed, probably more than disappointed. And then suddenly, at the end of a following week, without any warning, he said, right now, everyone, we're going to reshoot that scene of Alan's that he didn't like in Russia, so would you all turn around, please, quickly, we've got about 20 minutes. You know, he suddenly threw this at me. And so I did it again. You know, it was kind of wicked and wonderful of him at the same time, and I think he had very much a touch of both those elements. You know, he was very exciting to work with, but he really could sort of whip you along a bit, you know, and I mean, he hadn't warned me that it was coming, but so I suddenly had to do it, and I felt I'd sort of challenged his judgment. You know, all I'd been was slightly disappointed in myself, really, but I think he took it the other way. I mean, I think he had a terrific admiration for her work in that. He was wonderful to the actors. Actors loved him.